Axel Rothbard, Doc History, and I'm standing here in New York City. Just over this way I'm looking at Trinity Church. Right behind you, but in front of me, is the New York Stock Exchange, and here is Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States in 1789. Now, there's an interesting question here. Why is it that Washington was the first president in 1789 when we declared our independence as a country in 1776? Reasonable to ask, what happened over that 13-year period? Well, when we declared our independence from Great Britain in 1776, we were ruled by what was called the Continental Congress. And the Continental Congress was a group of delegates from each state who got together and made decisions like, let's leave England. After we won the war and Great Britain recognized our independence in 1783, we created what was called the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation was a document that laid out two branches of government to rule the U.S. A judicial branch to judge laws, and a legislative branch to make laws. There was no executive branch. There was no president. We were ruled basically by committee. There were a lot of problems under the Articles of Confederation, and so the Congress decided, you know what, let's create a new Constitution. Let us create the Constitution, the basis of U.S. government, and they redid it and had three branches of government now. An executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And in 1789, George Washington was elected and then became the first president of the United States under the new Constitution. And here in New York City is where he took his oath of office. A lot of people know about President Washington and the role that he played as the commander of U.S. forces during the Revolutionary War, but not a lot of people are as aware of what actually happened once he became president. What were some of the big issues that President Washington faced in office? Well, there are two basic visions that existed at the time for where the U.S. should go. One vision said we should head towards a more agricultural society, more rural, farms, and that should be the basis of the United States. That group called themselves the Anti-Federalists. Why? Because they were opposed to the second group, the Federalists. And the Federalists said, no, we need to be industrialized. We need to build factories. Factories are the future of the country. Washington created a cabinet, a group of advisors, a group of people who could help him out make decisions. And in his cabinet, he had both Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The most famous of the Federalists included his vice president, John Adams. Also among the Federalists were Alexander Hamilton, who's buried in the Trinity Church graveyard, who was the Secretary of the Treasury. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, though, was an Anti-Federalist. He believed in smaller government, more farming, not so much big government. That was one of the big debates that was going back and forth, and eventually led to the rise of political parties. Today the political parties are Democrats and Republicans. Back then, it was the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists went on to change their name because being anti doesn't seem too good to the Democratic Republicans. And interestingly, today's Republican and Democrat Party stem from the Democratic Republicans. Also going on during Washington's time in office was something called the Whiskey Rebellion. What had happened was Alexander Hamilton had decided that to pay off all of the debt that the U.S. had from the Revolutionary War, we were going to put a tax on whiskey. Now that might not seem like a big deal until you realize that whiskey is made from crops, right? All alcohol is based in things that you grow from the ground. And the farmers in Pennsylvania were very angry about this tax because it really actually hurt them the most. So they decided that they were going to rebel against the new U.S. government. President Washington was angry about this, and he in fact led troops into battle to put down the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania. The only time in U.S. history that the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, actually led troops into battle. Only time was the Whiskey Rebellion of President Washington. One of the other big issues facing President Washington was whether or not the U.S. was going to keep a treaty that we had made with France during the Revolutionary War. During the war, we had accepted French help. The French helped defeat the British, in fact. And in exchange, we said that if France was ever at war, we would help France. Well, now France was at war with England. And under the terms of the treaty, we were obliged to help France. France sent a man over here who the people of the United States called Citizen Guinea. And Citizen Guinea's job was to try and drum up support in the U.S. to help the French, which he did. A lot of Americans want to help the French. But the U.S. government was not strong enough at the time to do anything to help England, and we were afraid about getting into another war with England. So President Washington found a loophole in the law, and we did not end up going to war to help France. Instead, we made another peace agreement with England called Jay's Treaty. And under the provisions of Jay's Treaty, we basically agreed that we would not get involved in this war on the side of France. A lot of people were angry about Jay's Treaty, and it's one of the main things that in fact helped start political parties. President Washington was opposed to political parties. He said that we should stay united. There should not be this whole party system. That's not what ended up happening. In fact, by 1804, the party system had become so entrenched in the United States that there was a new amendment to the Constitution that set up a whole new way of electing presidents through the party system. This is still the way that we elect presidents today. President Washington was opposed to it. The other thing that President Washington dealt with was attacks from Native Americans, especially in what's called the Northwest Territories. Now, at the time, it was the northwestern part of the United States. In fact, Northwestern University in Chicago is called Northwestern because it was really as far northwest as you could get in this country. Today, it's in the Midwest. Anyway, in the Northwestern Territories were Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and there were Indian raids all the time going on there. And President Washington, one of the issues that he had to deal with was trying to secure that border to A, protect the settlers who were there, the American settlers, and the other thing was to protect the frontier to prevent raids from coming into the main part of the United States. In his farewell address, President Washington argued for isolation from Europe. He said we should stay as far away from European problems as possible. And in many ways, the United States did so until the start of World War I, already in the 20th century, more or less. There are some exceptions. President Washington also spoke about the need to work out treaties with Native Americans, and he spoke out against political parties. But it all started here in Federal Hall in New York City with President Washington taking the oath of office in 1789. For Doc History, I'm Maxwell Rothbard.